In the heart of Atlanta, where shiny skyscrapers stood tall against the backdrop of neighborhoods struggling to make ends meet, lived a young boy. He was just 17, but carried the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. His name wasn't important. What mattered was his story. Born into a family that knew more about hardship than comfort, he had grown up watching his mother work tirelessly to put food on their small dining table. She cleaned offices during the day and took up sewing jobs at night, her hands worn and calloused from years of labor. The boy didn't have much, but what he lacked in material things he made up for with determination. Every morning, before the sun even peeked over the horizon, he would lace up his old sneakers and hit the streets. Running became his escape, a way to clear his mind and dream of a better future. Those early mornings weren't easy. The soles of his shoes were thin, barely holding together after months of use. But they were all he had, and he made them work. Running wasn't just something he did for fun. It was a lifeline. It gave him purpose when life felt overwhelming. On those long runs through the city streets, dodging potholes and weaving past parked cars, he imagined himself breaking free from the cycle of poverty that seemed to trap everyone around him. He dreamed of going to college, getting an education, and building a life where he could take care of his mom instead of watching her struggle day after day. But dreams don't pay bills, and reality often knocked loudly on his door. After school, he worked odd jobs, delivering groceries, mowing lawns, anything that could bring in a few extra dollars. Some days he came home exhausted, his legs aching from hours of physical work. Yet despite the fatigue, he never skipped his evening run. It was his ritual, his promise to himself that no matter how hard things got, he wouldn't stop fighting for a better tomorrow. One day, while scrolling through social media during a rare break, he stumbled upon an advertisement for the Peachtree road race. It was one of the biggest marathons in the country, attracting thousands of runners from all walks of life. Something inside him stirred. Maybe it was the challenge or the idea of proving to himself that he could compete alongside people who likely had access to everything he didn't. Whatever it was, he decided then and there that he wanted to participate. Training for the marathon wasn't easy. He didn't have fancy gear or a personal coach guiding him. All he had was sheer willpower and the advice of a local high school track coach who occasionally let him join practice sessions. The coach saw potential in him, even if the boy doubted himself sometimes. "You've got grit," the coach told him once. "That's worth more than any expensive equipment." For months, he pushed himself harder than ever before. Early mornings turned into late nights as he balanced training with schoolwork and his part-time job. There were moments when he questioned whether it was worth it. Could someone like him really stand out in a race filled with seasoned athletes? But every time doubt crept in, he reminded himself why he started: to show the world, and most importantly himself, that he was capable of greatness. As the race date approached, excitement mixed with nerves. He saved up enough money to register for the event, though it meant skipping meals some days. When the confirmation email finally arrived, he read it over and over again, unable to believe that he was actually going to run in one of the largest marathons in the nation. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. On the morning of July 4th, he woke up earlier than usual. The air buzzed with anticipation as runners gathered at the starting line. He looked around, taking in the sea of faces. Some wore sleek outfits and high-tech watches, while others, like him, sported simple gear held together by determination. As the starting gun fired, he took off, his heart pounding not just from exertion but from the realization that he was doing something extraordinary. This wasn't just a race for him. It was a chance to rewrite his story. With each step, he left behind pieces of his old life, moving closer to the person he wanted to become. Little did he know, this marathon would change his life in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The race began with a burst of energy, thousands of runners surging forward like a river breaking free from its banks. The boy found himself swept up in the momentum, his legs moving rhythmically as he focused on keeping pace. The early morning air was cool, but the sun was already climbing higher, promising a warm day ahead. Despite the noise, the cheers from spectators, the thud of footsteps, and the occasional bark of commands from race officials, he felt oddly calm. This was his moment. As the pack of runners stretched out along the course, he settled into his stride. He wasn't among the leaders, that wasn't his goal. His aim was simply to finish, to prove to himself that he could endure the 10-kilometer challenge. Every step mattered, every breath counted. He had trained for this, sacrificed for this, and now he was living it. Somewhere near the middle of the route, the scenery shifted. The wide streets lined with cheering crowds gave way to quieter sections where only a few supporters stood holding signs. It was here that he noticed her, a girl standing near the curb no older than 6 or 7. She was clutching a stuffed animal, her face red from crying. Something about her caught his attention, tugging at him even as he tried to stay focused on the race. At first glance, she seemed fine, just another spectator watching the marathon pass by. But then he saw it. The storm drain next to her was overflowing due to the heavy rain from earlier that week. Water rushed toward her feet, swirling, dangerously close to the edge of the drain. Her parents were nowhere in sight, likely stuck farther back in the crowd. Panic flickered across her face as the current pulled her closer to the opening. Without thinking twice, he veered off the path, leaving the safety of the marked route. His heart raced, not from exertion this time, but from fear. Fear for the little girl. Fear of what might happen if he didn't act quickly enough. The ground beneath his feet was slick and he nearly slipped as he sprinted toward her. Time seemed to slow down, each second stretching longer than the last. He reached her just in time, grabbing her arm gently but firmly and pulling her away from the edge. The force of the water was stronger than he'd expected, and for a brief moment he thought they might both go down. But he dug his heels into the wet pavement, using every ounce of strength he had left to steady them. Once she was safely on solid ground, he knelt beside her, checking to make sure she was okay. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice soft despite the chaos around them. She shook her head, tears still streaming down her cheeks. "I'm scared," she whispered, clutching her stuffed animal tighter. "It's okay," he reassured her. "You're safe now." Her parents appeared moments later, frantic and relieved all at once. They thanked him profusely, their gratitude pouring out in waves. He waved them off, embarrassed by the attention. "Anyone would have done the same," he muttered, though deep down he knew not everyone would have stopped, not during a race like this. As the family walked away, the adrenaline that had fueled him moments ago began to fade, replaced by exhaustion. His legs felt like lead, and his lungs burned from the sudden sprint. He glanced at the clock stationed nearby, realizing how far behind he'd fallen. Finishing the race was out of the question now, but he didn't care. What he'd done mattered more than any medal ever could. Unbeknownst to him, someone had been watching the entire scene unfold. A young woman, dressed casually but exuding an air of quiet confidence, stood a few feet away. She had come to volunteer at the event as part of a community service project, something her father insisted she do despite her privileged upbringing. At first, she hadn't paid much attention to the runners. They all blurred together in a sea of determination. But when the boy broke away from the pack to save the girl, she couldn't look away. Her heart raced as she watched him pull the child to safety. There was something about the way he moved, the urgency in his actions, that struck her. When he knelt beside the girl, speaking softly to calm her, she felt a lump form in her throat. It was a simple act of kindness, yet it spoke volumes about who he was as a person. Curiosity got the better of her, and she approached him cautiously. "Excuse me," she said, her voice gentle. "That was incredible. You saved her." Startled, he turned to face her. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. No one had ever called him incredible before. "I just did what anyone else would have done," he replied, brushing off the compliment. She smiled, shaking her head slightly. "Not everyone would have stopped. Trust me, I've seen enough people ignore things that don't directly affect them." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth. He looked at her, really looked at her, and noticed the sincerity in her eyes. She wasn't mocking him or trying to flatter him. She genuinely meant what she said. "I'm Victoria." She introduced herself, extending her hand. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking it. "Nice to meet you," he said simply, unsure of why someone like her would bother talking to someone like him. Victoria didn't miss the hesitation. She sensed the walls he'd built around himself, the defenses honed by years of navigating a world that often overlooked people like him. But instead of pushing further, she decided to let the moment breathe. "Do you mind if I share your story?" she asked. "People should know about what you did today." He frowned, taken aback by the question. "My story? There's nothing special about it." "Oh, I think there is," she countered lightly. "Sometimes the simplest acts of bravery are the ones that matter most." Reluctantly, he agreed, figuring it wouldn't hurt to let her tell his story. After all, what difference could it possibly make? Little did he know, this chance encounter would set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. As Victoria walked away, pulling out her phone to call her father, the boy returned to the sidelines, catching his breath. The race continued around him, but his focus was elsewhere. He replayed the events in his mind, wondering if he'd made the right choice. Sure, he'd saved the girl, but at what cost? He'd given up his chance to finish the marathon, to prove to himself that he belonged among the runners. Yet, as he watched the families reunite and the smiles return to the faces of those around him, he realized something important. Sometimes, the greatest victories aren't measured in miles or medals. Sometimes, they're measured in moments that remind us of our shared humanity. The boy stood on the sidelines trying to catch his breath while the marathon continued around him. The cheers from the crowd were distant now, muffled by the whirlwind of thoughts spinning in his head. He kept replaying the moment over and over. Again, the girl's frightened face, the rush of water pulling her toward danger, the split-second decision to leave the race behind. Had he done the right thing? He didn't doubt saving her was the correct choice, but a small part of him wondered if he'd thrown away something important. He glanced at the runners, still pushing forward, their faces etched with determination. Each step they took reminded him of how hard he'd worked to get here. Months of training, early mornings, late nights, all of it had led to this day. And yet, as he watched them disappear into the distance, he realized that finishing the race wasn't what mattered most anymore. What stayed with him was the look of relief on the little girl's face when he pulled her back from the edge. That image stuck in his mind like a photograph he couldn't unsee. As he leaned against a nearby fence trying to steady his breathing, he noticed people gathering nearby. Reporters with microphones and cameras moved through the crowd, eager to capture stories from the disrupted marathon. One of them approached him, holding out a recorder. "Excuse me," the reporter said, flashing a polite smile. "We heard you saved a child earlier. Can you tell us what happened?" The boy hesitated. Talking about himself had never been easy for him. Growing up in a neighborhood where struggles were shared but rarely spoken about, he'd learned to keep his head down and focus on survival. But there was something different about this moment. Maybe it was the sincerity in the reporter's voice or the curious eyes of the spectators watching him. Whatever it was, he found himself nodding slowly. "I saw the girl near the drain," he began, his words measured and quiet. "The water was pulling her closer, so I ran to help. I didn't think twice about it." The simplicity of his explanation seemed to resonate with everyone listening. People nodded approvingly, some even clapping softly. The reporter pressed further, asking questions about who he was, why he decided to run the marathon, and how it felt to put others before himself. He answered honestly, though his responses were brief. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, and the weight of all those eyes on him made him uncomfortable. Just as the interview wrapped up, Victoria reappeared. She had been talking to someone on the phone earlier, her expression intense as she paced back and forth. Now she walked toward him with purpose, her steps confident but not intimidating. "Hey," she said, smiling warmly. "I hope you don't mind. I called my dad. He wants to meet you." Her words caught him off guard. "Your dad?" he asked, confusion creeping into his tone. She nodded. "Yeah. Let's just say he's pretty impressed by what you did today." Before he could respond, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Out stepped a man in his 50s, dressed sharply in a tailored suit. His presence commanded attention, but there was a kindness in his eyes that softened his otherwise imposing demeanor. Victoria introduced him as her father, explaining that he wanted to thank the boy personally for his bravery. The boy shifted awkwardly, unsure of what to say. Meeting someone like Victoria's father felt surreal. This was a man who lived in a completely different world, one filled with wealth, power, and opportunities the boy could only dream of. Yet, as the man extended his hand, there was no hint of superiority or judgment, just genuine gratitude. "Thank you for stepping in when no one else did," the man said, his voice steady and sincere. "What you did today reminds us all of the importance of looking out for one another." The boy shook his hand, muttering a quiet, "You're welcome." He didn't know what else to say. Compliments and praise weren't things he received often, and accepting them felt foreign. Victoria's father studied him for a moment, as if weighing his next words carefully. "I'd like to offer you something," he said finally. "A full scholarship to any university of your choice, funded by our foundation." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. For a moment he thought he'd misheard. A scholarship? To college? It sounded too good to be true. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. College had always been a distant dream, something he assumed was out of reach because of money, or lack thereof. And now here was this man offering him exactly what he needed to make it possible. I don't know what to say," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to decide right now," Victoria's father reassured him. "But please consider it. You've already proven that you're capable of greatness. All we want to do is give you the tools to achieve it." The offer left him speechless. Pride warred with humility inside him. On one hand, he wanted nothing more than to accept, to grab hold of this lifeline and run with it. On the other hand, he worried about appearing weak, about relying on someone else's generosity. He had spent his entire life fighting to stand on his own 2 feet, and the idea of accepting help felt almost like admitting defeat. Victoria must have sensed his hesitation. She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, her touch grounding him. "It's not charity," she said gently. "Think of it as an investment. In your future, in your potential. You deserve this." Her words struck a chord deep within him. Deserve. It wasn't a word he associated with himself very often. Life had taught him to expect struggle, to fight for every scrap of success. But maybe, just maybe, he was worth more than he gave himself credit for. As the conversation continued, he realized something else. This wasn't just about him anymore. If he accepted the scholarship, it wouldn't just change his life, it would change his mother's life too. She had sacrificed so much for him, working herself to the bone to provide even the smallest comforts. This was his chance to give back, to show her that her efforts hadn't been in vain. By the time the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city streets, the boy had made up his mind. He looked at Victoria and her father, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice stronger this time. "I'll take it." Victoria smiled, her expression lighting up with pride. Her father nodded approvingly, extending his hand once more. "Welcome to the beginning of something incredible," he said. Walking home that night, the boy couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. From saving the girl during the marathon, to meeting Victoria and her father, the day had been a whirlwind of emotions. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but beneath it all was a spark of hope, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to fully embrace in years. For the first time in a long while, he let himself dream. Not the vague, uncertain dreams he'd clung to before, but real, tangible ones. Dreams of sitting in a classroom, learning skills that would open doors he never thought possible. Dreams of making his mother proud, of giving her the life she deserved. Dreams of proving to himself and to the world that where you start doesn't define where you can go. As he reached his apartment building, he paused for a moment, looking up at the dimly lit windows. Somewhere inside, his mother was probably sewing late into the night, her hands moving steadily despite the fatigue. Tomorrow he would tell her everything. He would share the story of the marathon, the scholarship, and the unexpected turn his life had taken. And together they would celebrate, not just the opportunity ahead, but the resilience that had brought them this far. Because sometimes life throws you a curveball. Sometimes it pulls you off course and asks you to choose between what you want and what's right. And sometimes when you least expect it, doing the right thing leads you straight into a brighter future. The next morning, the boy woke up with a mixture of excitement and anxiety bubbling in his chest. It wasn't every day that someone offered you a scholarship to college, especially not someone like Victoria's father, whose wealth seemed almost mythical compared to the life the boy was used to. He couldn't stop thinking about it, replaying their conversation over and over again in his mind. Was this real? Could he actually do this? He got out of bed quietly, careful not to wake his mom, who was already asleep on the couch after another long night of sewing. She worked tirelessly, her hands moving like clockwork even when fatigue threatened to pull her under. He stood there for a moment watching her sleep, guilt tugging at him. This opportunity wasn't just for him, it was for her too. For all the nights she stayed up late so he could have clean clothes, for all the times she skipped meals to make. Sure, he had enough to eat for all the sacrifices she made without ever complaining. He owed it to her to take this chance. When she finally woke up, rubbing her eyes and stretching her tired arms, he sat down beside her. "Mom," he said softly, waiting until she looked at him fully. "I need to tell you something." She raised an eyebrow, curious but calm. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts before diving in. He told her everything: the marathon, the little girl, Victoria, her father, and the scholarship offer. As he spoke, he watched her expression shift from confusion to disbelief to pride. By the time he finished, tears were streaming down her face. "Do you really think I can do this?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Despite the confidence others had shown in him, he still doubted himself sometimes. Old habits die hard. His mom didn't hesitate. She grabbed his hand tightly, her grip firm despite years of wear and tear. "You've always been stronger than anyone gives you credit for," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "If they believe in you, then I know you'll make it happen. You're going to change our lives, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." Her words hit him like a tidal wave, washing away some of the fear and doubt that had been clinging to him. This was it, the turning point he'd been waiting for. But as much as he wanted to dive headfirst into this new chapter, part of him worried about what came next. College wasn't just about academics. It was a whole new world, one he wasn't sure he was ready for. A week later, Victoria reached out to check in. They hadn't spoken much since that day at the marathon, but she had promised to stay in touch and help guide him through the process of applying for schools. When she called, her voice was warm and encouraging. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Honestly, I'm nervous," he admitted. "I don't even know where to start." "That's okay," she reassured him. "We'll figure it out together. My dad's team will handle the paperwork, but I want to make sure you find a place that feels right for you. What do you want to study?" He hesitated, unsure how to put his dreams into words. "I've always liked building things," he said, finally. "Fixing stuff around the house, figuring out how things work. Maybe engineering?" Victoria lit up. "That's amazing. Engineering is such a great field. You'll love it, I promise." Over the next few weeks, she became more than just the daughter of the man who offered him the scholarship. She became a mentor, a friend, and someone who genuinely cared about helping him succeed. She sent him links to programs, walked him through application essays, and encouraged him to dream big. At first, he felt awkward accepting so much help, but Victoria had a way of making it feel natural. "You earned this," she reminded him whenever he tried to downplay his achievements. "Don't forget that." Despite her support, adjusting to the idea of college wasn't easy. The boy often found himself questioning whether he belonged in such a prestigious environment Would people look down on him because of where he came from? Would he be able to keep up with classmates who had access to resources he could only imagine? These doubts gnawed at him, threatening to overshadow the excitement he felt about starting fresh. One evening, while scrolling through brochures Victoria had sent him, he stumbled upon a photo of a state-of-the-art engineering lab. Students in white coats tinkered with machines, their faces glowing with curiosity and passion. For a moment he allowed himself to picture it, himself standing there surrounded by tools and technology, working on projects that could change the world. It was a beautiful image, one that filled him with hope. But then reality crept back in. How would he afford textbooks, let alone housing or transportation? Even with the scholarship covering tuition, there were countless other expenses he hadn't considered. He sighed, setting the brochure aside and leaning back against the couch. Just when he thought he'd found a solution, another obstacle appeared. Victoria noticed the shift in his mood during one of their calls. "You sound stressed," she said gently. "What's wrong?" He hesitated, debating whether to open up. Finally, he decided to trust her. "It's just, the scholarship covers school, but what about everything else? Books, rent, food? I don't know if I can handle it." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a second he feared he'd said too much. But then Victoria spoke, her tone resolute. "Don't worry about that. We'll figure it out. There are grants and stipends available for students like you, and if those aren't enough, my dad has connections. Trust me, we won't let anything stand in your way." Her words eased some of his worries, but they also highlighted a deeper issue: the imbalance between their worlds. While Victoria moved through life with ease, doors opening effortlessly before her, he had to fight tooth and nail for every opportunity. It wasn't fair, but dwelling on it wouldn't change anything. Instead, he chose to focus on the positives, the fact that people believed in him, that he finally had a shot at creating a better future. As the months passed, the pieces began falling into place. With Victoria's guidance and the Foundation's support, he applied to several universities, each one offering programs that aligned with his interests. Every acceptance letter felt like a victory, a reminder that he was capable of achieving greatness. Eventually, he settled on a school known for its strong engineering department, located just a few hours away from home. Leaving Atlanta wasn't easy. It meant saying goodbye to the familiar streets, the friends who had grown up alongside him, and the community that had shaped him. But it also meant stepping into a world full of possibilities, one where he could rewrite his story on his own terms. On the day he left, his mom hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Make us proud," she whispered, her voice breaking. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Victoria came to see him off too, surprising him with a care package filled with snacks, notebooks, and a handwritten note. "You've got this," she wrote. "Remember why you started." As the bus pulled away, carrying him toward his new life, he stared out the window, taking in the city skyline one last time. His journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while he felt hopeful. Hopeful that he could rise above his circumstances, hopeful that he could build a future worth fighting for, and hopeful that kindness, like the kind he showed that little girl during the marathon, could truly change lives, including his own. The first few weeks at college were overwhelming in ways the boy hadn't anticipated. Everything felt bigger, louder, and faster than anything he'd ever experienced. The campus buzzed with energy, students rushing to classes, professors lecturing, in rooms filled with eager faces and endless conversations about projects, internships, and future careers. For someone who had spent most of his life navigating a world that often felt small and suffocating, this new environment was both exhilarating and intimidating. He quickly realized that fitting in wasn't going to be easy. His classmates came from backgrounds vastly different from his own. Some wore designer clothes and carried laptops worth more than his entire wardrobe. Others talked casually about summer trips abroad or family businesses they would one day inherit. Meanwhile, he struggled to keep up with basic expenses, counting every dollar and stretching meals as far as possible. At times, it felt like he was living two separate lives, one inside the classroom where he worked hard to prove himself academically, and another outside where he constantly reminded himself of how far he'd come and how much further he still had to go. Despite these challenges, he refused to let doubt take over. Every morning he woke up early, just like he used to back home, and laced up his worn-out sneakers for a run around the campus. Running had always been his escape, and now it became even more important. It gave him time to think, to clear his mind, and to remind himself why he was here, to build a better life not just for himself but for his mom too. Those quiet hours before dawn became sacred, a moment when the weight of everything didn't feel quite so heavy. One day, after finishing his run, he noticed a flyer pinned to a bulletin board near the engineering building. It advertised an upcoming robotics competition, inviting teams of students to design and build innovative solutions to real-world problems. Intrigued, he stopped to read more. The idea of creating something tangible excited him. It was exactly the kind of challenge he'd dreamed of tackling. But there was a catch. Participants needed to form teams, and he didn't know anyone well enough yet to ask them to join him. Feeling discouraged, he walked away, telling himself it wasn't meant to be. Later that evening, though, Victoria called him. She had made a habit of checking in regularly, asking how school was going and offering advice whenever he needed it. This time she could tell something was bothering him. "You sound distracted," she said gently. "What's wrong?" He hesitated, unsure if he should share his frustration. Finally, he sighed. "There's this robotics competition I want to enter, but I don't have a team. Everyone else seems to already know each other, and I'm starting to wonder if I belong here." Victoria paused, her silence thoughtful. Then she spoke, her tone firm yet comforting. "Listen to me. You belong here just as much as anyone else. Don't let imposter syndrome trick you into thinking otherwise. As for the team, why don't you reach out to your professors? They might know students looking for teammates, or better yet, put up your own flyer saying you're looking for people to collaborate with." Her suggestion lit a spark of hope in him. Why hadn't he thought of that? The next day, he took action. He designed a simple poster announcing his interest in joining or forming a team for the competition. Within hours of pinning it up, he received several messages from fellow students eager to work together. To his surprise, many of them shared his passion for problem-solving and innovation. Together, they formed a group of 5, each bringing unique skills to the table. Working on the project brought a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since leaving home. Late nights in the lab became routine, fueled by pizza and caffeine as they brainstormed ideas and tested prototypes. There were moments of frustration, when their designs failed or disagreements arose, but those struggles only strengthened their bond. Slowly but surely, he began to see himself as part of a team, valued not for what he lacked but for what he contributed. As the competition approached, excitement mixed with nerves. Their invention, a low-cost water filtration system designed for communities without access to clean drinking water, was inspired by stories he'd grown up hearing about neighborhoods struggling with basic necessities. When he pitched the idea to his teammates, they immediately embraced it, recognizing its potential impact. Now, standing backstage as they prepared to present their work, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he'd come. When their turn came, he stepped onto the stage, heart pounding. The audience was large, filled with judges, professors, and other competitors. He glanced at his teammates, drawing strength from their encouraging smiles, and began speaking. His voice started shaky but grew steadier as he explained their project, emphasizing the importance of accessibility and affordability. By the end, the room erupted in applause, leaving him stunned. For the first time, he truly believed he belonged here. Though they didn't win first place, their project earned recognition and praise from the judges. More importantly, it opened doors for him. Professors began reaching out, offering research, opportunities, and mentorship. Fellow students approached him, wanting to collaborate on future projects. Even strangers complimented his presentation, telling him how inspiring it was to see someone tackle real-world issues with such authenticity. But success came with its own set of challenges. Word spread about his background, the kid who saved a girl during a marathon and earned a scholarship, and soon, whispers followed him wherever he went. Some were supportive, calling him a role model. Others weren't so kind, accusing him of relying on pity rather than merit. Comments like, "He only got in because of charity," stung, planting seeds of doubt in his mind. Was he really good enough, or was he just a token success story? One particularly tough day, after overhearing a snide remark in the cafeteria, he retreated to his dorm room, feeling defeated. Just as he was about to call his mom to vent, Victoria texted him. "How are you holding up?" she asked simply. He debated whether to open up, but eventually decided to trust her. "People are saying I don't deserve to be here," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. There was a long pause before she responded. "Let me tell you something," she said firmly. "You didn't get here because of pity. You got here because you worked harder than anyone else in that room. You faced obstacles most people can't even imagine, and you're still standing. That's not luck, that's strength. Don't let anyone make you forget that." Her words hit him like a lifeline, pulling him back from the edge of self-doubt. She was right. He hadn't come this far to let negativity define him. Instead of focusing on what others thought, he chose to focus on what mattered, his goals, his dreams, and the promise he'd made to himself and his mom. By the end of his first semester, things began falling into place. Academically, he excelled, earning top grades in his courses. Socially, he found his footing, forming friendships with classmates who respected him for who he was rather than where he came from. Professionally, he secured a part-time job assisting one of his professors with research, giving him valuable experience and a steady income. Most importantly, he rediscovered his confidence, not the kind that comes from external validation, but the kind rooted in self-belief. He remembered the little girl he saved during the marathon and how that single act of courage changed everything. If he could step off course, then risking everything to do what was right, he could certainly face whatever challenges lay ahead now. One evening, as he sat in the library working on an assignment, he caught sight of a quote scribbled on a sticky note attached to a nearby desk. It read, "Success is not given, it is earned." He smiled, feeling a surge of pride. No matter what anyone said, he knew he had earned his place here, and he wasn't done yet.